Invincible didn't become a worldwide sensation by chance. Its success was the direct result of the weariness that millions of people started feeling toward the classic superhero formula that Marvel pushed for years. For over a decade, Marvel convinced us that superheroes were just modern myths. Then stories like Invincible started to tear down that fantasy with their most nihilistic, corrosive, and irreverent take on what it means to be a hero. But before audiences could get to a place where they'd embrace a raw and violent story like Invincible, we need to look into how the tone of the superhero genre has changed over the last 5 years. To do this, we'll dig into productions that stand as key pillars in the genre's evolution and showed us a new path away from classic heroes. If this piques your interest, get ready and make yourself comfortable because I'm going to tell you everything right here. My name's Didier Solanilla, and welcome to Solomatographics. To get how Invincible turned into a global phenomenon since its first season dropped in 2021, we need to first understand how the superhero genre has evolved over the years. Marvel ruled the global box office for nearly a decade. The MCU did something groundbreaking. It built a shared universe of heroes where each film not only introduced a new character, but also served as another chapter in a much bigger story, Thanos' quest for the Infinity Stones. By 2016, the year Captain America Civil War came out, one of the MCU's biggest hits, the genre was at its peak. We were in the middle of the superhero craze. Movies revolved around comics, naturally pushing studios to adapt the panels into live action. Marvel movies had become the epitome of superhero adaptations, productions that blended action, visual effects, and simple story arcs, all with the aim of portraying fantasy characters in a modern setting. However, on February 12, 2016, about 3 months before Civil War came out, Deadpool hit theaters. At first glance, after the genre had already given us a huge variety of superhero films, Deadpool seemed just like another installment. It's the story of a chaotic, irresponsible, violent, and funny vigilante. But in reality, the film offered a fresh breath of air against the repetitive tone that many Marvel productions were starting to adopt. Wade Wilson wasn't a traditional hero like the Avengers. Even though he wanted to do good, he used methods that were the moral opposite of the classic hero. In other words, Wade Wilson was an anti-hero. And even if it doesn't seem like it, Deadpool reminded us of something important. The most interesting characters aren't just those who represent a perfect ideal, but also those who navigate the gray areas comfortably. Wade Wilson wasn't a complete villain, but he was definitely someone profoundly questionable, and he accepted it without any remorse. While Marvel and DC aimed to bring amazing characters to life through huge special effects and epic stories, Deadpool went for a much more human character, truly grounded in reality. A vigilante with superpowers, but with no mega corporation to fall back on, no team of heroes around him, and no epic cosmic origin story. The movie instead presented us with a social misfit who was pushed by circumstances to become a misunderstood phenomenon. Even though it was a risky move, Deadpool made a total of $782.6 million worldwide, costing only $58 million. In other words, a big financial win. And its success showed something really important. A more violent, absurd, raw, and true-to-life style could connect with audiences too. However, even though the movie proved that epic and big MCU crossovers weren't the only way to go, there still wasn't a single piece that took those ideas to the max. A production that fully embraced the most fragmented, darker, and human side of anti-heroes. And that product was The Boys. While the MCU was on track to wrap up the Infinity Saga, Amazon started working on one of its biggest hits, The Boys. The Boys didn't just refresh the genre, it completely transformed it. Its premise introduces a world where heroism isn't a selfless act by a masked figure anymore, but rather the ultimate display of American capitalism. All orchestrated by Vought International, a corporation that's been pulling the strings of the system for over a century. Plus, the supers in this reality aren't aspirational figures like those from Marvel or DC. They're celebrities obsessed with their public image, backed by massive marketing teams in charge of crafting popular acceptance and affection, while secretly engaging in all kinds of questionable acts with no moral boundaries. And this is where one of the most distinctive elements of the series comes in. The superheroes aren't the good guys in the story. They're more like the antagonists, figures protected and funded by a corrupt and rotten system that doesn't reward genuine goodness, but rather acts carefully planned to uphold a gigantic machinery of power and profit. The series format that the boys proposed greatly helped to develop these ideas. The series was able to explore conflicts far beyond superpowers, like Homelander's fragmented psyche, the self-destructive spiral that Butcher and the boys find themselves trapped in, the complex love relationship between Frenchie and Kimiko, and the growth of Huey Campbell. But above all, the boys examined how megacorporations use the media, social networks, and public image to manipulate entire populations. The series makes it clear that the real superpower is controlling the masses through status and narrative. However, amid all that chaos, variables capable of challenging the system appear, in this case, Butcher and the boys, ordinary, fragile, and emotionally unstable humans facing demigods, practically invincible beings, but who deep down are still human. In this world, the real heroes aren't the most powerful beings, but those who are willing to hold out even when they know they'll probably lose. But to adapt all this, the boys had to come up with a completely different tone from the one the genre had been using for decades. One that's raw, more violent, with more gore, and much more in tune with the real conflicts of modern society than the light, epic fantasies popularized by Marvel. The success of The Boys not only changed how the audience viewed the genre, but also how platforms started producing these kinds of stories. Amazon got something fundamental. There was a huge audience interested in more violent, emotionally raw approaches, far from the traditional heroism popularized by Marvel. After The Boys made such a big cultural and commercial splash, the platform's execs started hunting for projects that could keep that same edgy and brutal vibe, but with a fresh twist. That's when Amazon set its sights on a comic that had exactly what they were after, Invincible. At first, Invincible seemed like just another superhero cartoon, but it actually picked up a lot of the elements that turned The Boys into a hit: explicit violence, psychological battles, moral dilemmas, and a much more down-to-earth and destructive take on heroism. However, Invincible stood out in one key way. While The Boys broke down the superhero myth with cynicism and political satire, Invincible did it with emotional drama and family tragedy. Still, one thing we can't overlook about these two shows is that they both use loads of recycled elements to craft a cohesive and meaningful story. Ideas like the concept of an evil Superman, the fatherhood of an almost all-powerful being, the involvement of government agencies in superhero-related matters, established groups of superpowered individuals, and crafting story arcs that reflect more of a villain's journey rather than a hero's own. The series takes the classic tale of a teenager discovering their powers, a formula made famous over decades by characters like Spider-Man, and turns it into an emotional nightmare where the real conflict isn't saving the world, but figuring out what being a hero really means. And that's where Invincible cements the modern evolution of the genre, because it's no longer just about fantasy, visual spectacle, or epic battles between good and evil, but about psychologically broken characters, complex human relationships, and violence not shown as empty entertainment, but as a brutal consequence of that hostile world. These are ideas that have been very popular with audiences so far, and they are and represent the future of the superhero genre. Alright guys, that wraps up today's analysis. I hope you liked it, and if you'd like to see more analyses like this, of course, swing by my channel where I've got plenty more content like this. Of course, we'll meet again in a future analysis, but for now, I wish you good luck. My name's Didier Solanilla, and remember, hearing about it isn't the same as seeing it with your own eyes. Bye.